What's an argument that you lost because the other person was too dumb to understand your logic? Story 1. My coworker thinks that police radar guns work by scanning cars to see how hot their engine is. Because the faster you go, the hotter it will be, right? I tried explaining how Doppler radar works, but she remains convinced that she's correct. Because, and I quote, my husband has one of those radar guns and uses it when he's cooking on the grill. Your husband has an infrared thermometer, you nut. Story 2. Guy once told me he was speeding on his motorcycle one night in the freezing cold and was almost caught by a police helicopter with an infrared camera. He said he ditched the copter by taking his coat off and cooling his body down to ambient temperature so the infrared camera couldn't see him. I ignored the fact that he'd be dead if his body temp dropped that much and simply asked why they couldn't pick up the heat from the engine. He said infrared cameras only pick up heat from organic sources. At this point I decided against even trying to argue against any of the ridiculous points he was trying to make and just noped right out of the conversation. Story 3. Was trying to ask my neighbors to shut their dogs up at night because we can't sleep, but my dogs never bark. There they are, barking in the background, SMH, and walk away. Story 4. A guy I used to work with believed that germs were a myth. He thought bad air is what made you sick. We worked in a meat department. Luckily he would wash his hands and keep stuff clean, but his logic was dirty things make bad air. I tried so hard to convince him germs were real. To the point I would print off literature of various educational levels, from kindergarten to college level, and he believed it was all a hoax. It drove me up a wall. He also believed the moon landing was fake. We got in heated arguments over it, to the point my boss put a ban on discussing the moon at all. Story 5. You should always drive as fast as possible to get the best MPG. Driving twice as fast cuts your travel time in half and cuts your gas usage in half as well. Story 6. I did not get credit in a game of Trivial Pursuit for my guess of King Tutankhamun. The correct answer was, yep, you guessed it, King Tut. I was like 13 and we had just done an Egypt study in school, so I was positive about being correct and pretty proud for knowing it. Story 7. In HS football, the night before a game, we would get together and set goals for the game. Defense set the goal of 200 total yards of offense allowed. I corrected the 2A to make it less than 200 yards. They disagreed adamantly and kept the greater than. I was tutoring 4 of them in math at the time. They also hit their goal, more than 200 yards given up. Story 8. I was trying to explain to my roommates that we can't leave our front door unlocked 247, especially when no one is in the apartment and when they're out and I'm sleeping, and that they should replace the keys they lost. Plus we're on a college campus where theft is pretty common, and my room was broken into the previous year. Then we live in on a college campus so we're safe. What good is a locked door going to do if someone comes in with a gun? If something happens, that's just life. We went around in circles for 27 minutes. Worst argument ever. Story 9. They kept insisting that they were entitled to their opinion over something that was a fact. For some reason telling her that her opinion didn't sway the truth just made her double down. Situation. I mentioned that a certain YouTube personality was gay. I said it matter-of-factly, not to be mean. The guy has mentioned being gay on his channel several times. This girl got mad and girl kept denying he was into dudes. This was despite me pointing out that he openly identified as gay. She cited that it was her opinion to validate the dude's sexuality on what her stupid wants to believe. Story 10. Whenever I use words my mother never heard of and tells me to correct myself, I now have to actually get Google definitions to show her I'm not speaking nonsense. Cause I used to always lose those because she's the mom and older, therefore she knows more than me. Story 11. When my friend said that dinosaurs never existed and it was all a conspiracy perpetrated by natural history museums to deny God and make everyone atheists. Story 12. I got into an argument with a guy who swore red cars were faster. His rationale was because Ferraris are always painted red, which is also not true. At first I thought he was just messing with me, but no, he really believed it and nothing I could say would change his mind. I finally gave up on arguing with stupid and told him how right he was. Story 13. I'll be finishing up my history degree in a few months. I really shouldn't be arguing my subject with people who've never had a reason to pick up a history book, but I was stuck with a buddy of mine for several hours a day for the better part of last year, and we got around to talking about pretty much everything. At one point, for one reason or another, we got to talking about the Comanche Indians. I mentioned a common misconception, and he countered with a stereotype that he learned in grade school. We went back and forth for a while, and I tried to reference books on the topic, but his response was always to restate the same stereotype and say I'm part Cherokee, so I know. Eventually, when he clearly had nothing left to say, he asked the most annoying question possible in that situation. Yeah, well, were you there? How do you even respond to that? I definitely wasn't there, but neither was anyone else alive today, and accepting that argument would pretty much void all study of history. I pretty much gave up. He's not a dumb guy, but history is clearly not his field, and there was no way anything was going to come of the argument. Story 14. It's not usually logic I have trouble with, it's nuance. I'm really tired of the media being dishonest. I feel like it's the largest contributing factor to the destruction of our country. So if I correct the media and point out Beto O'Rourke committed a misdemeanor and is not in fact a felon and therefore can own a firearm, my conservative friends come back with guess you went to the other side. No, I'm just correcting an inaccuracy. Or if I say Trump didn't say X that was taken out of context, what he really said was XY. All my liberal friends say you Trump supporters are destroying this country. And oh, read the words I said, this is the other half of the problem. People cannot think critically. They cannot evaluate a simple statement and pull meaning from it without it being tainted with bias. Correcting a person's story, anything, does not mean you don't support that person's story, anything, it simply means you've corrected an inaccuracy. We live in an era where if you do not propagate a lie, you are not on our team likes the lie. It's so 1984 I can't stand it. The truth is all that matters. Search for truth, not confirmation. This was recent. Someone who doesn't run tried to tell me that running on a treadmill doesn't count because you can just lift up your legs and that the track does all the work. I tried to explain that while it isn't 100 the same as running outside, your body wants to stay relative to the moving track, so yes, you are propelling yourself forward, and many outside runners, myself included, run on treadmills at some point for training when the weather isn't cooperating. I'm pretty sure we would be able to tell if we weren't exerting any effort on the treadmill. He said the people who run on treadmills are lazy and we are all wasting our time pretending to work out. Okay buddy. Story 15. I'm a bartender. When I put a drink up to be run to a table in the restaurant, the servers have to put a garnish on depending on the drink. I see new guy standing there staring at the lemons. Ask him what the deal is and he responds these limes aren't ripe yet. Try to explain that's not how that works and guy tells me I don't have to be in a holy. Suffice to say we've lowered our standards for servers lately. Story 16. Flat Earth and Newtonian relativity. When I was still in school, I'd work with my girlfriend's dad on some weekends for some extra money, and I'd normally be the only college-educated one in a field of grown blue-collar men. When one of them learned that I was a physics major, he was very eager to prove that my entire education was wrong. He tried to argue that the Earth doesn't rotate and therefore, still not sure how this even draws this conclusion the Earth is flat. His argument was that the duration of a flight going the same distance from east to west should be different than a flight going from west to east because one way, you are flying with the rotation and one you are flying against it. I tried explaining relativity in the simplest terms possible. He understood throwing a ball when you're in a moving car train, walking in a moving plane, every possible example I could think of, I'd explain and he'd agree. When we got to a plane taking off being like the ball and the Earth rotating being the moving car train, I just completely lost him every time. He said it can't be the same and the liberals brainwashed me if I actually believe that. Story 17. I once was innocently commenting about something on the news about the Pope. The idiot guy I was dating was like, I don't want to hear about those stupid Christians, you can't trust any of them. I'm like, name, you're Lutheran, aren't you? Him, yeah, exactly. That's why I try to avoid Christians and their rants. 20-minute convo, as I tried to explain to him what a Christian was and that he was one. Didn't understand, believe. Turned into a breakup convo for realizing how dumb he was, ha ha ha. Story 18. Whist getting a tour of our children's school garden. The teacher is rambling on about the different veggies and stuff they grow. We are walking by these giant sunflowers. Teacher, oh, these are sunflowers. For making popcorn. Me, you mean you add them to popcorn? Teacher, no. Sunflower seeds make popcorn. Me, 100 sure corn kernels are used for making popcorn. Hence the name popcorn. She sighed and moved on, continuing to think I'm a hulking 65 Neanderthal. Now we're at the herb section and she points at the thyme and rosemary. Teacher, this is thyme and rosemary. We use these to make chocolate. Me, what? You add those to chocolate? That has to give it a funky taste. I'm surprised the kids like it. Teacher, no, we don't add it to chocolate. Chocolate is made from them. I gave up questioning her at this point and finished the tour silently contemplating how this woman can zip up her pants in the morning, let alone get a degree and teaching certificate. Story 19. I pointed out that his car mirrors were tinted blue. I just thought it was interesting. He got really offended, and when we actually looked at them to prove my point, he said one of the most baffling things I've ever heard: the mirrors aren't tinted. Reality is. Story 20. One of my college teachers gave us a test on computer hardware. One question was, what is the most important part of any computer? It was multiple choice: CPU, memory, motherboard, PSU. I told him that the question made no sense. All of the parts are necessary. No one is most important. Without anyone, the computer would not work. He insisted that it was the CPU. Story 21. Last time I needed to call the support, I needed to verify myself. The quite unfriendly sounding lady told me to give her a PIN. I told her I never set up a PIN. Her answer basically was I shall tell her the PIN anyway. That went on around 5 times until I just hung up. Side note 1. You need to verify yourself before that step, which I did via temporary PIN in an SMS. Side note 2. She never gave an option to do that or even set up a new PIN. She insisted on giving her a PIN that does not exist yet. Story 22. Still a little mad about this one. I was in a marketing class and we had a big project to present why someone should or shouldn't go with a certain marketing strategy. We had Group A argue the for side and my group argue the against side. Well, Group A went first and they gave every detail of the entire argument, including all of the pros and the cons. They gave every detail, neither making it look good or bad because they gave both sides of the argument. So when we went up and presented only the negatives, we got criticized for looking like we didn't know the full picture. But the whole point was to argue why it wouldn't work. Story 23. A guy I knew in high school insisted Hawaii was in the Gulf of Mexico because that's what it showed on the map. He even opened our textbook to show and then looked at me like I was an idiot. I just told him to educate everyone he could then. Story 24. An uncle whose firm and unshakable belief that climate change is a hoax is based on one thing: there was an above-average amount of snow in January. Story 25. When I was working waiting tables, they changed scheduling systems and the times printed were in military time. My shift said I started at 10:50, so that is when I show up, 10:50 a.m., at the end of my shift. My manager hands me a write-up to sign for being late. I refuse because I was there at my scheduled time, 10:50 a.m. He then tried to tell me I was supposed to be in at 10:30. This is when I go and grab the paper schedule and point to where it says 10:50, clearly written. At this point I start to notice that all of the start times were either at the top of an hour 100, 1300, etc., or at the hour and 50. When making the schedule, he thought that 50 in military time was a half hour and would not listen to me when I explained as clearly as I could that it was the hours that changed, not the minutes. He still put that right up in my file, stupid. Story 26. I will preface this by saying my wife is not dumb. Anyway, I gave up on trying to get her to not use metal stainless utensils and non-stick pans after about the 5th argument about it because she is either too ignorant or too stubborn to not do it. So all of our non-stick pans have a bunch of scratches and gouges in the non-stick coating, yay. Story 27. Girl tried to convince me that she would lose her virginity if used tampons. I literally had to teach her the anatomy of the vagina uterus, and she said that if you retract the while taking it's self-oral. I just wanted to kill myself after that. Story 28. I tried to explain the weapon's effect to a relative, explaining that, since he chose to carry a weapon, concealed carrying would be safer than open carrying. They thought I was trying to take their guns and kept asking why it's their fault if other people are nervous. I had just said other people are more likely to act aggressively once they see a weapon. This never clicked. I didn't say this part to them because I never wanted to get shot, but if you show someone you're armed, I would argue it is well your fault they've become nervous. How is that even an argument to them? Story 29. Played chess with a friend who did not the rules of chess. They believed pawns could kill an opponent by going forward, and that they could also move side to side as long as they are just going one space at a time. Story 30. Tangentially related, but in K-12 on a number of occasions I got into an argument with someone who would resort to talking at me in Spanish which I didn't speak and then end with a triumphant expression, believing they had just won the argument because I couldn't refute their points. Story 31. Allah is just another word for God. No, it's not. Allah is Satan worship. What? God be praised. Stop talking about Satan. I'm leaving. Run away, coward. This guy I used to work with also believed that vaccines are bad and the earth is flat. He got fired for being a quick-to-anger idiot, not for his beliefs. Story 32. Someone was scared of getting a driver license because of the danger involved, so they were going to get a motorcycle license because it was a safer vehicle to operate. I tried telling them it was more dangerous, but they weren't having it. Story 33. Before the word honest. The proper article is an honest man, etc. My teacher no, that's wrong. Ma shows her multiple sources her I have a degree. Im right mean degree. Story 34. Telling someone about my disability and they just say no you're not. You don't have that. You don't act like someone who has that. Edit him on the autism spectrum. Story 35. How George Bush and Obama can both be scoffed at for how the housing market crash was handled. You know Democrats and Republicans can both make mistakes, right? Story 36. Might be too late to the party, but I'll still share. I lost an argument with my sister over her new association with Amway. She brought in Nutri, vitamin pills and claimed they were better than other brands. To prove this, she dropped her pill and another brand's pill into water. Because the Amway pill dissolved in water, ITLL get dispersed through our body, and the other brands didn't dissolve ITLL go straight through your digestive system. When I brought up stomach acid, she doubled down on the fact that human bodies are 60 water. Story 37. Not the last argument, but when I was 18, I had a girl try to tell me that all the bakeries on my country were actually owned by one company that was controlled by the government. I lived in Australia. When I pointed out to her that I was doing a bakery apprenticeship at the time and that my family had been in the industry for more than 3 generations and no less than 6 members of my extended family owned bakeries, she just looked me in the eyes and said, well, I'm sorry to burst your little bubble. I swear I could see the back of her skull through her eyes as the wind whistled gently between her ears. Story 38. In high school chemistry, during a lab report, I answered a question that asked for mass in terms of mass. The teacher, a football coach, told me my answer should be in terms of density because it wants the mass of a volume. He asked if the material was giving me a headache. I said no, it's you, and he kicked me out of the class. Story 39. Neighbor terrible person was selling a car, wanted $700 for it. My friend offered her $600. She got mad, said let's just split the difference. Give me $350. So he said, sure thing, you win. She never figured out what she did. Story 40. Got in an argument with someone about the true purpose of graphic novels, and they kept saying that the story didn't matter, and whenever I gave insight they said I was being stubborn. Yeah dude, I'm supposed to be stubborn when arguing a point I stand by. Story 41. I tried to convince a flat earther friend that the moon was indeed a sphere that reflects the sun's light. After running logical circles for about 2 hours, I finally got fed up and offered to get my telescope out and show him with his eyes that the moon is a giant rock and doesn't produce light of its own, because his whole argument was you can't see it with your eyes so it's not true. He refused to look through the telescope and claimed I was attacking his religious and personal beliefs for this. Story 42. I had acute liver failure a couple of years ago. Right before I was discharged I was told by my doctor that cannabis was very liver intensive and I should avoid it for the 12 to 15 weeks while my liver revived itself. I go home and my friend offers to smoke me up. I refuse and tell her what the doctor told me. She replies that's impossible, weed has no effect on the body, and I reply then how do people get high from it, and she'd tell me that weed only affects the brain, not the body, and that I've been brainwashed by racist propaganda. Just as an FYI, the brain is a part of the body and weed is actually pretty liver intensive. Story 43. Countless customers when I was fixing cars. One time I was doing an oil change on a guy's Mercedes 240 SL. It was a Mercedes, middle-class car, older guy. I'd say he was in his late 40s. He walked into the back of the shop where I am filling oil and he begins to yell at me saying that I've put too much in. I tried to tell him that this was a big engine and that 2 liters of oil isn't enough for any car, let alone the larger V-style engine. I just got the boss to deal with him. Then my favorite was a caravan that got towed into the shop and it wouldn't start or anything. Customer insists that the battery was too new and it fried the computer or something. The second I open the hood I see the problem. When he replaced the battery he didn't know there are plastic caps over the terminals to keep them from shorting on stuff. Once he saw me pull the plastic caps off the battery he became so embarrassed his wife had to pick up the car. He walked out and we would always joke about the caps to the customer's wife and we all got a good kick of it. Moral of the story, if you didn't spend years in a shop or go to school for automotive, don't try to argue it. LOL. TLDR. Man gets mad for me trying to put correct amount of oil in car. Other man changes battery, forgets plastic caps and says computer is fried. Story 44. I was trying to explain to my ex how percentages work, especially adding and subtracting percentages. She had started her own photography business, and I was teaching her about bookkeeping. I explained to her that if you add 25 to a number, you have to subtract 20 of the result to arrive back at the starting number. She immediately corrected me 25%. That ended with a fight, and the day after she was still trying to gather support for her side. Story 45. You can actually win these arguments if you mix some compassion with your point, because that's how people with no logic argue. Just kill them with kindness. Edit. Hey race my IMO license and registration officer. Story 46. Me. Karma doesn't exist. Them. Then what do you call it when someone does something bad and something bad happens to them? Me. That's just a coincidence. Them coincidences don't exist. Story 47. Is water wet? Fire is a chemical process. Daniel. Therefore your argument is invalid. Daniel. Water makes itself wet. Daniel. Edit. To the cannibalistic carnivorous potatoes that said water is wet in the reply section. You are incorrect. Yes, a single molecule of water is not wet, but if another H2O molecule was added to that one it would be wet. I'm also sorry that my autocorrect is in whole and puts a space between everything, therefore is not a hard thing to mistake, so stop nitpicking at every little thing in a comment. And yes, I would like to get some tacos. Good day, holes. Oh, and the person that said fire is not burnt so water is not wet, you're an idiot. Story 48. I don't argue with my brother over scientific philosophical things anymore. When I do, the conversation goes something like this. Him. How could they? Scientists who discovered something, for example, possibly know X. Me. It took Y amount of effort, experimentation, and prior knowledge. He. Oh, then how come Z, where Z is something he heard either watching Ancient Aliens or else has no actual clue about, which usually leads to me either going into more detail with my explanation if I know something about the subject matter, or be admitting I don't know all the facts and guesstimating. That results with him brushing everything I said aside because he thinks he's right, has no clue how actual knowledge gathering works, and can't be bothered to try and understand. I love the guy to death, but his la 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 I can't hear you attitude drives me up the wall sometimes. Story 49. Won a bet from another bachelor's degree holder in physics. Him and I went to different schools, but still, come on, I said that you could have liquid water below 32 degrees Fahrenheit by adding salt to the mixture. He disagreed. I made the obvious to anyone who learned cool facts in chemistry class, that water solutions generally if not exclusively increased boiling PTS and decreased freezing points. He acknowledged the likelihood I was correct but disagreed completely that I could accomplish the result because, and I quote, where does the extra cold come from? Granted I couldn't explain where the extra cold came from without looking it up, but nevertheless, he bet me $50 that I couldn't prove to him with bucket, salt, water, ice, and standard thermometer would be lower than 32 degrees Fahrenheit after minute of mixing, 30 minutes to go to a couple stores later I had $50, and for the curious. The extra cold comes from the water giving away its extra heat to break down the crystalline structures present in ice. The saltwater solution having lowered its freezing point essentially makes more heat from the liquid water available to be used in breaking down the ice. Story 50. My poor brother has a story about this. I should start by saying that both our parents are engineers and were very good about giving truthful, thought-out and scientific answers to our childhood questions. Unfortunately in grade school, the teachers weren't the same. One day he got in a slight argument with another student about moon boots. The other child claimed something along the lines of, the moon has no gravity, therefore astronauts need moon boots to stick to the moon or else they'd fly off. My brother corrected him by saying that there is gravity on the moon. The other child wasn't having it though and his smugness got to my brother, so he decided to have the teacher weighed in. He was positive the teacher would side with him and wipe that smirk off the dumb kid's face. He asks the teacher, is there gravity on the moon? She replies, no, the moon is out in space where there is no gravity, and dismissed him. My brother now has his master's in mechanical engineering and a healthy skepticism of authority figures' opinions. He is also still upset about what happened that day. Story 51. Oil companies are responsible for CO2 emissions. Well, actually we are the ones who burn the oil fuel, not me. I don't drive. Literally every single thing you buy has been flown, shipped and trucked to you, and that doesn't even count shipping the raw materials or manufacturing it. Story 52. I asked my supervisor in a manufacturing plant why the new hires were not using a bin to catch parts off the line, but were instead pulling them off the line and packing them directly. He had no clue what I was talking about, but he looked into it and later decided that it was more cost-efficient to stand there and hold the part until it comes off the line and pack it instead of letting them collect and packing them as needed. The difference is that if you use the bin, you have time to measure a part, perform the required testing and attend to your line so that it's less likely to catch fire without needing a second person to step in to relieve you. The bin effectively replaces your second person. It makes the job a lot easier, and there is no additional cost to anyone in any way. The parts are finished and packaged in the same amount of time, but nobody has to hold the part and wait for it to come off the line. Unfortunately, my supervisor thinks that if my hands are not busy holding the part, the company is losing money, because lean manufacturing, the customer isn't paying for parts to fall into a bin after all. He makes almost double my salary. That line caught fire today. Story 53. The world isn't flat, but you only believe that because that's what school taught you. No, it's because it's been proven by science. But look at it this way. Then I walked away. Story 54. My middle school bully, and I got into it whether it was Hermione or Hermione. This was shortly before the Harry Potter movies had come out, and I was telling her that I'd seen an interview with JKR in which she had pronounced it correctly, but my bully insisted on the incorrect one because that's how me and my mom and my sister all say it, as if strength in numbers had any bearing on the situation. My bully was a girl, y'all. It says her right in the post. We were both middle school girls. She just also liked to be abusive to me for no reason. Story 55. Coworker tried to tell me that if you murder someone and the police don't know about it, then it didn't happen, not as in, it's not on the books and you won't get in trouble type of didn't happen, but as in the event never took place. One particular quote of his that stood out during that conversation was, "Reality is irrelevant." Couldn't convince him that the police knowing about something has no effect on whether it happened or not. Story 56. Got into an argument with an animal rights activist vegan. She said I refuse to eat meat because I believe in the rights of animals because animals are living things. I asked what about plants? How much death is in your salad? She said plants aren't living things. Story 57. Getting some insurance stuff handled and I was on the phone with the insurance company. They asked for names and birthdays of my kids. I have 3 kids, 2 of which are twins. I give him the name and birthday of twin 1 and then the name and birthday of twin 2. Guy says to me the kids can't have the same birthday. Is it a different year? No, they have the same birthday, they're twins. He proceeds to tell me that he can't put this into the system because 2 different kids can't have the same birthday. He then asks me, and I quote, "Are you sure you have 3 kids?" And then I hung up and called back a couple hours later and talked to someone with a brain. Story 58. My ex-friends always mocked me, because I used to wear protective gear while mountain biking. I told them it's better to have something and not need it, than to need something but not have it. I explained it with dozens of examples, but they just didn't want to get my point. Story 59. My friend genuinely believes that a woman can only get pregnant if he is on top, because if she is on top, the gravity does not allow your nut to travel with sufficient speed to reach the egg. These are his words, and it always baffled me that in his brain, scientific terms were mixed up with such stupidity, even a child would laugh at. I failed to change his mind. Story 60. Used to work at a grocery store that offered both paper and plastic. Lady I'm helping asks for plastic because it is raining. I bag in plastic. People behind her come up, asked why I didn't just bag in paper instead because paper is better for the environment. I explained that they are the customer and I have to give the customer what they want. They said it was still my job to help save the earth and I should have bagged in paper. I asked if they thought smoking was bad. They said yes. I asked if they would back me up refusing a sale for cigarettes because cigarettes are bad for people. They said no because they are a customer and it is their choice. I tried to link it back to giving the customer what bags they wanted even if it was bad for the environment, but it is still your job to save the planet. You have to bag in paper. Wouldn't unpack their cart as they went at me, so I just stopped responding to the argument and asked if I could help unpack their cart. They stop asking questions for a moment to load up the belt, and I think that this mess is finally over. As I am scanning the last few items, they ask if I am vegan. I say no. They ask why not. I tell them their total and ignore the question. They ask again why not. It's bad for women especially to eat meat. I tell them to have a nice day, and immediately engage the next customer. Story 61. You didn't come to a stop, but you acknowledge that I rolled backwards. Yeah, but you didn't stop. For reference, between going backwards and going forwards must be a point where you are going 0 miles per hour, aka stopped. The officer disagreed. Story 62. Trying to convince my mother-in-law that my husband and I aren't brainwashed. Which is more likely that one American political party has 100 control over every news source in every country on the planet and is forcing all of them to tell the same exact lies, or that the other American political party has strong influence over one single American news source. The only news you can trust to tell the truth is Fox. Okay then. I guess we're done here. Story 63. Me trying to convince my parents that Trump is a corrupt idiot. They say he's not a politician. I point out 1,000 examples and the response again is, he's a bull in a china shop and he's not a politician. Edit. I have only ever voted Republican, but have no idea what to do in the next election. The only exception was 2016 when I voted for Gary Johnson. Story 64. Literally any political argument, I'm not even going to say it's a thing where the other person is dumb, but the logic is lost on them because they don't have the same basis of facts to believe you. It's like trying to explain to a Martian why the oceans are blue. Case in point, last Christmas, I started having a political discussion with my brother-in-law, and he started his rebuttal with, well, I heard on Hannity that Story 65 that the average man is stronger than the average woman. He claimed that since he knew women who were stronger than him, that carried over to all women. This was an argument about how women needed to be wary of men in unsafe places, dark parking lots, etc. Story 66, you walked in and thought you saw me banging your friend, but I'm here to tell you in fact that was not me, and that was not your friend, her, but I saw you both, but I'm telling you that it wasn't. Besides, I cannot recall where I was, and I refuse to believe a friend would ever drug and take advantage of me, and betray you in such way. Her, that's bulls. WHYD, she apologize. You aren't listening to me, told you that she's not your friend, but also it wasn't me. Story 67, my friend thought that when the weather said 60 chance of, that it meant that only 60 of the area would be affected, and the remaining area would be clear. We argued for about 30 minutes on why that's not how it works before a teacher overheard and tried to correct him. He even argued with the teacher for another 10 minutes before we both finally just gave up. Story 68, a state of emergency was issued for Nashville because of flooding, and a friend of a friend said, why is it a state of emergency if it's not for the whole state of Tennessee? And I didn't even try. Story 69, I had a comment get hundreds of downvotes because I explained to someone how the ISS cools itself by using an ammonia refrigeration system that radiates the heat into space. I was promptly told by like 30-some people that it's impossible to cool the ISS that way because space is a vacuum and there is nowhere for the heat to go. Then I made the mistake of trying to explain how heat radiation works, and no amount of linking NASA's own material on how they cool the ISS would change the opinion of this collective hive mind of stupidity. It was at that time I started to respect the power of the Dunning-Kruger effect.